Hey, I'm only about halfway finished with this library book. It's called Learning to Program by Stephen Foote, and I've been kind of doing it off and on for a while now. Let's see. I did not figure out how to make each one of these one at a time. I click it, I click another one, and it doesn't take away the CSS style. Now, I did a video where I do have the code. I just tried to replace the code and do the same thing here, and something didn't pan out. So I'm still working on that. But in the meantime, I wanted to go over a couple of little things. This is, let's see, I think this is as far as I got. I don't think I finished 8. No, see, I don't have any notes for chapter 8. So I'm only 1 through 7 finished, and there are 15 chapters. So I'm not even quite halfway done. What I would like to go over is a couple of really short things. If you'll notice, when I pan through each of these, I have this background that you can see as I scroll down. You can see the whole thing, but only when there's a gap. Well, as it turns out, my gap is actually my H1 header tag. And it's taking this background as a background image for it. And it's fixed, so it appears that, that the header is actually a hole in my page that lets you see. So that was a nice little effect that I had. But not really going on and on about that. Notice how this particular background, it doesn't really matter. It's just a bunch of pebbles. It's all over the place and it doesn't look strange. This right here doesn't look strange because it looks like the focus of my background image are these ducks in a pond. So that didn't really throw me off. Number 3, this didn't throw me off so much either because it's a pretty scene. You've got a white picket fence here and the trees and there's ducks here. So I didn't feel like that was strange. This didn't feel strange either because it looks like that's the top of the image. This is what's strange. When I got to chapter 5, the top of my picture, I don't get to see my flowers. I just get to see my leaves. And I thought, well, I really don't think that I put a background image as my tulips, but without the tops of the flowers. So I needed to look up, what did I, not the animations, that's something I haven't looked at yet, but I needed to look up background position. Now here, this is showing you the different ways that you can put a background image, and here's the image, repeat, no repeat, background attachment is fixed. That's the way mine is. My background attachment's fixed so that I can scroll over it. Background position, center, top. Okay, the two words center and top, this is saying that it's centered at the top. So let's say you've got a ball and you want it to be the background position, you want it to be at the top. So this would be the top of the page and the center of the top of the page would be like right in here. This would be your ball. That's if you had a small ball, and that's what, if that's where you would want that to be, that's what you would say, center top. My particular background is this. Background Earl, it's pointing to my tulips.jpg image, but these are the words that I used. No repeat, center, center, fixed. So it's fixed, it's not going to scroll with my page, but center, center means, let's think, remember the ball. If it was, where did that page go again? Center top means it would be at the top of the page and in the center. Center, center means that it would be not at the top, not at the bottom, but at the center and in the center. So not center top, not center bottom, but center. So I would be positioning my image smack in the middle like that. So now look at my monitor. My monitor is a rectangle. It is in landscape view. As far as the rectangle is concerned, it's not portrait view, it's landscape view. So that it's wider than it is, it's short and wide. Now, my tulip image is the opposite. It's more in portrait view, so it's taller than it is wide. That caused my that caused my image, since it's not skewed, since it's actually taller than it is wide, but it's set fixed center, center, no repeat. And it's also another thing. Let me go back to my code again. We also have these 4 different statements that says the background size is going to cover. So it's going to cover my monitor as well. So what happened was, since I took a tall picture and tried to center it this way and cover it as well, it kind of took the top off of my flowers. So I had to figure out how to get my flowers back. And this is what will work for me. I can take my background position and set it to 100%, 10%. That means 100% on the x coordinate, which is left, right. The x coordinate is like the grass or the horizon, and the vertical, the y, would be like a tree, up, down. So now this position is going to take my image and it's going to set it completely from left, right, but 10% from the top. I think I'm saying that right. It doesn't seem like I'm saying that right, but when I take this Z off of it and I run that page that had the tulips chopped off right here, and if I refresh it, now I have the top of my tulips. Now when I scroll down, everywhere that I have an H1 header tag that is actually using a background image fixed, that gives you the illusion that there's a hole in the page, you get to see the leaves at the bottom, but then you get to see the flowers at the top. Now by maneuvering that maybe from 10% to 5%, you can mess around with this background and stick it the way you want. See, if I go down more, it brings this down further and further. 5%. What if I change that to 50%? What would happen then? Oh, now I'm back to just leaves again with not seeing any flowers at the top, so I don't want that. So I'm going to go back to 100%, 10%. And I'm sure that if I would have put some different keywords in here besides center, center, maybe if I would have put center top. Let's see what would happen if I did that. And let me misspell this. Let's see what it does now. Okay, well that definitely made more sense, but for my entire page, since again my monitor is a landscape view, it's giving me quite a bit of white space from the wall and a little bit of the stem, but not really getting as much of the leaves as I'd like. This is okay. You can go that route, but I want a little more of the leaves. So I'll leave this center top so that I'm actually centering my background image to the center of my monitor. And if it chops some of the top off, I'm just going to force it where I want it by changing my background position. 100% of the X and 10%, I guess this is 10% from the top to the bottom. This is 100. Just quit trying to explain this because I'm confusing myself. But I know that 100%, 10% gives me what I want, even though I've got this set to center fixed. So did I go back here? That's my preference. The top of the page, I see flowers, I go down and I see leaves. I could make this force up a little bit more, I think, if I wanted to. Instead of 10%, what direction do I want to go? What happened when I did 5%? Did it go up higher? No, it went lower. So 25%. That went up higher. So now I've got more leaves when I'm down here at the bottom of my screen, and as I climb up I can see flowers. I kind of wanted it half and half, maybe 20%. So it's like you're kind of playing around with it and guessing till you go, yeah, that's what I want. Leaves. I see the top of this one and the top of this one. I don't see the top of this one. Maybe I'll go with that. But anyway, I just wanted to show you there's so many different ways to set up your background image. And if you get to a place where you're like, ooh, that didn't look how I wanted it to, just go ahead and Google it. And like here, I looked up CSS backgrounds. And they show you a bunch of different ways that you can set up your background for your body or for your div, whatever you're setting it up for. In my instance, again, I set that up on my H1, which is strange. How many, because it's a header, but I wanted a background image for my header, and I set it up strange like that. Okay, so that was just a little bit about CSS backgrounds and how to set that up. Oh, this is showing you again a little more example of that. The other thing I wanted to go over was in chapter 7. Here, let's see. For all the other chapters until I got to 7, I took advantage of this single audio tag. So I've got one audio player, and each time I click a navigation here, it sets me up with a different MP3 file that I read the entire chapter. So here, this one was almost 45 minutes long, and this one was, an hour and 2 minutes, almost an hour and 3 minutes long, and that was a continuous reading of the chapter. And so all of these with the on-click event just caused that MP3 to play. This one was another one that was over an hour, and same thing with chapter 6, almost an hour and 17 minutes. But I was curious about what if, instead of playing the entire thing all at once, what if I could take that whole MP3 file and break it into increments? So, of course, I Googled and I found out how I can set an on-click event to my H1. I've used my H1 to see a background image, and this right here is actually the text to my H1, but I forced it down with my CSS so that it's like, and it also has a shadow so that it's not conflicting too much with random busy backgrounds. And anyway, that's how I set that up. But back to what this is all about. If I click on my H1, which is this whole thing, plus the text, I could either click on the text or I could click on any of this image because that's my H1. Chapter 7, if for while you can't hear it, but let me turn it down because I can hear it. I have a player here that's not on the landing page. That's throwing me off. As you can see that it's running right here. You can see that the time's moving. I just had to move this down because it was distracting me. I was hearing my voice in my ear as I'm trying to talk, and it was throwing me off. But as you can see, it's definitely running. Now, I've got a landing page which harbors my navigation here on the left, and it also harbors my audio tag right here. But this little area right here is the iframe that pulls in external HTML files. So what I have starting on chapter 7, that not only do I have the information here, but I also have an audio tag that has an opacity set so that you can't see it, but it has a hover event so that when you hover over it, you get it, you lose the opacity and it goes opaque. Well, it's not completely opaque because you can still see through it slightly, but this lets me know that it's working and it's running. And the interesting thing about this is it's only taking a certain increment of the MP3 file. From here, everything that I'm reading has to do with this part and all of this stuff until I get to this next H1 element. And when I get here, then I can click this and this section will play. Now, going back up here, this is still playing, but I think it's only going to play for like 2 or 3 minutes and then it's going to stop. and it's not going to have any more. Now, this is kind of weird because not only do I have it in this hoverable audio player, as you can see, it's 1 hour 11 minutes and 20 seconds. I also have the ability to link it up here, and this one up here that's part of the landing page, when I click this just reads it consistently from front, from beginning to end. There is no increments here. But again, I just wanted to experiment with the ability to chop it up into increments. So I'm going to show you the code. If you want to chop it up into increments, I'll show you the code where I stuck this audio player in the landing page. And I'll also show you this audio player that's in the external chapter 7 HTML that's being pulled into here, so that you'll have two different methods to pull audio into your whatever it is you're making. If you want to get into tutoring, or maybe making your own digital notebooks, or whatever the heck you might want to do with code, you might find these little tidbits interesting. I love to code, so even though this might seem really stupid and random to some of you, I get a lot of kicks out of learning different tips and tricks of coding. So anyway, let me go into chapter 7. No, let me go to the landing page first. Let me go to my landing page. I just named it Index Learning to Program.html. Not the nicest name, but basically it's the name of my book, plus I tacked on the word index in front of it. Chapter 7 is what I'm dealing with, so let me move here till I see 7.mp3 right here. This is how my navigation lets me click on something and get my 7.mp3. This is a link, and from here to here, the anchor tag, the link tag, this is the opening A tag, href equals, and this right here is the path to my external web page. Inside of a folder called box, I've got another folder called pages, and inside of that I've got a file called 7.html. That is my web page, my external web page that gets sucked into this landing page by the iframe. Target equals content. The name of my iframe on this landing page, actually the name of it is content. So target equals content means we're gonna point to this page, and we're going to pull it into an iframe that has this name. You may, if you do any coding at all, remember target equals underscore blank means that if this were an external web page, you would open it up in a new tab. Well, really, I can open this up in a new tab as well if I have target equals underscore blank, but I didn't do that. I wanted to open up in my iframe that has the ID of content. Now, these two commented out statements were things that I was playing with, because I was playing with two different audio excuse me, players. I wanted to hide the big one when I was using the little one in the external HTML, the 7.html. I didn't want to see the big one in the landing page, so I did practice with these two by using document.getElement by ID, parentheses and quotes player, because the name of my audio tag is player. .style.visibility equals hidden. That's one way to hide an element. And then another way to hide an element is document.getElement by ID, parentheses and quotes player. Again, that's the ID of my audio player. .style.display equals none. So you could use visibility set to hidden or display set to none, and one of them hides it and also removes the space that it took up, and the other one hides it and leaves a blank space where it used to be. So if you want to practice making some of your elements disappear and then see how the rest of your page flows, you can practice with these two different statements. But that's not really anything that I care about. I just happen to mention it because it's right here inside of the code that I'm showing you, and I'm just explaining it. So again, this is the opening anchor tag, and this is baloney because it's in comments. This is how you open the comment, and this is how you close the comment so that it doesn't execute. But inside of that anchor, I've got a list item. Okay, and on my list item, I have onClick equals, and this is just changing the color because remember, each of these has a different color. Each one of these list items is given an onClick event that changes the style right there in line. It's, not the greatest way to do it, but it does work. This .style.background color equals, and I used an RGBA, which is your red, green, blue, and alpha channel. So 0 on the red, 0 on the green, 111 on the blue, and 1 on the alpha channel means there's no opacity. The alpha channel goes from 0 to 1. 0 is completely transparent, completely hidden. That's another way that you can hide an element, by giving its A value, its alpha channel, as fat 0. If you want it to be completely opaque, then you give it a 1. A 0.5 would give it somewhere in between transparent and opaque. So anyway, this for 7, for page 7, this is this blue. That's what, daggone it, that's what this RGBA gives you, that blue. Okay, anyway, enough of that. If, for, while, and when is on the face of the list item. See, if, for, while, and when. And because it's a list item inside of, let me go up a little bit to the very beginning to show you the tag that it's inside of. OL means ordered list. Because it's in an ordered list tag, you get number 4 with whatever I put on the face. It automatically numbers. The OL tag automatically numbers list items. All right, back to where I was. Go back to 7, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the closing anchor tag. Anything that you put inside of an anchor tag makes it clickable as well. The anchor tag by itself, without this in here, you would put words that you wanted the user to click on. That would make it a link. Well, in this case, I used a list item, I gave it a background color, and I also styled it with CSS so that it would have this oval shape, and I used some JavaScript, it was JavaScript or CSS, to make it move as well. When you click it, see they move, they get a little rotation going on there. So let's see. That's not all that I want to talk about. Let's see, the href pointed to the external web page. The target puts that web page in the iframe that has the ID of content, or the name, one or the other. I'll have to check in a second here. I can't recall if it's the name or the ID. And then the onClick event is going to target document.getElement by ID, quotes player.src, which means source. And while this href is pointing to the path to my external HTML web page, this .src is pointing to the path to my MP3 file. So inside a folder called box, I've got another folder called audio, and then I have my sound file that I named 7.mp3, which again is the reading of chapter 7. So you see, by clicking my list item that's nested inside of a link tag, I am able to execute an MP3 file. So by clicking this, you can hear that MP3 go. Now, this is how my landing page made that happen. Now I want to show you my individual 7.html, the one that gets targeted to the landing page. This is a totally separate file, totally separate page. And here in the beginning of the body, there is a div ID equals radio, just so I can stylize it however I wanted. Whoops, here's the opening div tag and here's the closing div tag, and a very simple line of code for the audio. This is the opening audio tag right here. Audio ID equals my audio. SRC equals, and here's the path to it. Now this time, because I'm in my folder for pages, I have to do the I have to do the dot dot to jump out of the pages folder, and then a forward slash to jump into the audio folder, and then a forward slash to jump into, or rather point to, the 7.mp3 file. So when you're in different files and folders, and some are in the same folders and some are in different folders, you have to do this little dance about jumping in and out of the folders so that you can target whatever it is that you need. All right, it also uses this word controls so that you can see the controls, and it also has this word preload so that it will preload that MP3 file. All right, so this is the interesting part. In my div with the ID of content, I have a slew of notes, and this is my H1 tag. Here's the opening part of the H1 tag, and I've got a non-click event. Just like my list item had a non-click event that changed the background color of the list item, when you click my H1 here on this page, it calls a function called play segment, and it uses parameters, because inside of the parentheses, instead of having the name of a function and empty parentheses, it's got some stuff in here. It's got two things. It's got one thing here, a comma, and then another thing there. Now, when you call a function and you put something in the parentheses, when you're calling the function, not when you're creating the function, but when you're calling it to make it work, when you're flipping that light switch to turn it on, these things inside the parentheses are called arguments. When you invent the function and then you put things in the parentheses, at that point what you put in the parentheses are called parameters. So when you call the function, you have to put a replacement for the parameters, your own arguments, to replace the function's created parameters. So in my function, when I created it, I had two parameters, and when they called it, or when it's being called here, I have to answer those parameters with my own arguments. This lets a function become very flexible with different information going in, but the instructions or the recipe for the function are always the same. The only thing that changes is what you put inside the parentheses. Now, as you can see, we have a 0.0, comma 220.5. Well, can you possibly guess what that means? Remember, I told you that this in page 7 was taking my MP3 file, and it was only playing increments depending on where I was in my notes. So this 0.0 is meaning the very beginning of the MP3 file, and this would be the end. And this is in seconds. So for instance, let's say we had, let me pull up my calculator. Let's say we had something that was 3 minutes and 14 seconds long. Well, 3 minutes is 60 seconds. So you would take 3 times 60, right? 3 times 60 plus, if it was 3 minutes and 14 seconds, we would add 14 seconds to that. So plus 14 equals, and we got 194. So that's how I got that number. 220.5 is where that stops. And for every H1 tag where I just want a little snippet of my MP3 file, I had to actually watch the file. I had to watch the audio watch. This is what I had to do. Click here and click the H1 to get it running. Gotta mute this again. I would have to listen to it until I got to the point that I wanted it to stop, because I would look my notes here, or I would actually look in the book until where my next H1 tag would be, and I would watch until it got to the words that was finishing my little section, and then I would pause this really quick, and while it was paused, I would look at how long the actual snippet was. And then based on how long the snippet was, I would pull out my calculator and I would figure out how many seconds that was. And again, if it was a 4 minute long snippet that I was listening to, 4 times 60, that would be 240. Now, it's easy when you start with 0, but when you go down to here, this was starting at 220.5 and it ended at 534.5. Well, it really wasn't hard because technically watching my, well, I didn't have to go to this one. I could go to this one because this one doesn't keep disappearing on me. This one is playing the whole chapter 7. And so I would listen to this until it got to whatever words that I wanted it to finish with. Again, I would look at my book and follow along and I would go, okay, now it's done, let's say here. That's the chunk I want from here to here. So then I just go here. I'm like, oh, that's 7 minutes and 11 seconds. It's going to end at 7 minutes and 11 seconds. So I'm going to go over here. Okay, 7 minutes would be 60 times 7 plus 11, 431. That would be my ending seconds. And then I would put 431 for the beginning of my next chunk, right? So then I would play it again, blah, blah, blah. Let's say it stopped here, just for the hell of it. And so this would be my ending seconds, for sake of argument, 13 minutes and 14 seconds. So then I go here and I clear it. 13 times 60 plus 14. 794 would be my ending time for that little snippet. Then my third snippet would start at 794, and so you see the pattern. Everything in life is a pattern. Now, it was cool and interesting, but it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be because I went and did all this. I was very time consuming to sit there and click and listen and read at the same time and stop and then, do the math on the calculator and figure out what the seconds were. And the reason you're seeing this 0.5 and stuff is because of course, nothing in life can be totally cross-browser compliant. And with this particular code that I'm using, I don't know if it's the browsers or if there's a better way to do this, but with this particular way, I would get my numbers to be perfectly in sync with, let's say, if I was doing all my testing in Firefox, then I would get all those numbers for each one of my H1 click events, and I would test it. Oh, boom, I get to here and it plays and stops right. Basically, I would want to hear the name of my H1. Like this would be comparison operators. I would hear me reading and I would want right there in that first statement to be something saying this. And then when I got to the next one, I would want to hear me say this. Very close, And so I got it down pat all in Firefox and I thought, oh, awesome. Now I got to test it in, of course, Chrome, and I have to test it in Opera. And for some reason, Chrome and Opera had a lag from what Firefox had. So I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So it's not perfect. It's not perfectly browser compliant with my timings. And since I haven't found a better code than what I just found, what I'm going to do when I read chapter 8 or 9, or even if I even do it in increments like that again, because it seemed like a cool idea at the time to have the ability to get these little mini chunks and based on my code, just let the user click it and then they would just hear the person read from here, information that went from here to here, then it would stop. And if they wanted to hear about this part that went from here to the next one, they'd click on this until they got to here. Then they click on this and it would take them, into these little short spurts of reading instead of listening to an hour and 11 minutes and 20 seconds all in one, thing, which really is not that big of a deal because you always have the pause button here. You could always pause it. I just wanted the control to be able to do it, to be honest. I just wanted to see how to do something, and that's why I like coding, because it's like a puzzle to me. I think of something, I don't know how to do it. I go online and I find some code that lets me do it, and then I find out it's not a perfect world. And then I go crazy trying to find a better way to do it, and so on and so forth. And I can just do this until I croak. But going back to my code, I've showed you how to call the function. I told you what it meant. I told you how I got the numbers and the physical way that I went about it. But let me actually show you the function play segment so you can see further how the recipe works, not just how to call it. So I'm going to look up play segment. So I've got to find my script for my JavaScript, and that happens to be way here at the bottom of the code right before the ending body. And it's very simple. It's just this little piece right here. No, I take that back. It's more than that. It starts, where's my opening script tag? Here's my opening script tag. Var AUD equals document.getElementById, parentheses and quotes, my audio. So remember when I first created my audio tag, I gave it an ID of my audio. Well, the document.getElementById points to it, and after it points to it or targets it, we use this assignment operator to shove that information into a variable, and then we do stuff with the variable. We don't just do stuff with this big long drawn out thing over and over again. We make everything easy by assigning it to a variable and then doing what we want to do to the variable. So we're going to use this variable short for audio, just odd. And that was our first line of JavaScript. Now this right here, before I found this code, for every little chunk, I did a little mini function. And it's all commented out now because it's just absolutely ridiculous that I even did this. But, you know, everything happens in baby steps. You find one way to do something, then you find a better way to do it. And this was my original way. I gave each little chunk its own name. And then I used odd.currentTime equals where that time started, and then odd.play to play it. Well, this was fine as far as clicking on my H1 tag. Each different H1 tag that I would put a non-click event, I would just call this function and it would start it, but it wouldn't stop. It would just start it from there and then read it all the rest of the way. So for instance, let's say going down here, I click this, and if I go over here, you can see where it started it. It's still running it. Or if I go a little further down and I click this one, you can see how much further up it went. So that one single number was my starting point. So if you went here and you clicked, it would start it at the appropriate place, but then it would just read everything from there to the end of the whole chapter. Again, I wanted just the little mini chunk for the little thing that was in between headers. And so therefore, this was not good enough. Plus, look how many functions I was dealing with. I was dealing with a function for every H1 tag. That was just plain stupid. But this was the increment that I started, and I found a better way to do it. So instead of all these little functions with their individual start points and no end points, I wound up using that initial statement that I read. I still had to target my audio player's ID and give it a variable to play with, but instead of all these functions doing it, I also, well, I didn't create. I got this from the internet. The code that I found created another variable, and this variable is called segment end, because remember, I had a beginning, but I didn't have an end. So I needed the end as well. And then we had the event listener, which made it great because then I can target all of my H1s. But this isn't really showing me that I'm targeting my H1s. This is targeting something called time update, which is an event. Kind of like instead of a click event, we are updating a time on the audio player. I don't really know how to explain it, so I'm just going to go over the code. There's the variable odd. When everywhere you see odd in green here, that's representing that whole document dot get element by ID, the that audio name that I created. But instead of using all that, we're just using this. Dot add event listener means the browser is going to listen for a particular event, something that the user does on the page. Could be a click, mouse, whatever. In this case, it's called time update. So this event is in quotes, and then we have a comma here, and we have all of this stuff inside wrapped in a function. So we have function with no name. It's an anonymous function, empty parentheses, and that whole thing goes from this red curly brace all the way to this. And then we have another function here that I'll read too. But back to this part, we're creating our event listener for the time update event, and wrapped in this anonymous function we have a curly brace. Then we have an if condition, and if whatever's in these parentheses, if that's true, then it's going to do what's in these curly braces, which is pause the audio player. So what the condition is if segment end and, now the double and symbol means both sides, the left side and the right side, have to be true in order for this whole statement to be true, and this whole condition has to be true in order for this to execute. If this thing is not completely true from the left side of the double and symbol to the right side of the double and symbol, then it will ignore this and move on to this. So anyway, this is the condition. It is if segment end and odd dot current time is greater than or equal to segment end. So we come up with a value for segment end, okay? And as long as, or when that, I'm sorry, when we get to the end, when both the segment end and the current are greater than or equal to whatever the segment end is, it will pause the audio. If this is false, it will skip this part and it will go to console log and in parentheses odd.current time. Now this, you're not going to see this unless you hit, let's see, if you're in Firefox and you want to look at console log, if I'm not mistaken, I think you could just hit F12 button. Let me see, F12 button, and then you get this console here, and you can test stuff in here, which, let's see, where can I type? I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, this is basically the development tools. That's how you use the development tools if you're getting into coding with Firefox. And I think you can do the same thing with Chrome. Just open up a tab in the browser and hit F12. And with Firefox, I think you have to go a little step further to get to their development. Let me see. I'm really doing too many sidebars here. Okay, so you're in Opera. You want to use your development tools. You go to Menu, Developer, Developer Tools. And so here you've got your console. And so if you're practicing coding, you say var name equals Bob. Okay, and then you've created a statement where you're creating a variable called name and you're setting it to the value of the string Bob. And then if you want to check it, you just type the variable and hit enter, and it spits out what the value is, Bob. So I'm not going to go into this. If you're not a coder, you're just thinking why. But if you are a coder and you don't know how to use these browser development tools, this is a nice thing to have to practice your code outside of your browser code itself. I particularly like to use my my files, but that's another way to look at your code and check the values for things. But anyway, console log is something that you would see the value of the current time there. Let's see, and then you got this part right here that closes up that function body, a comma, and then false. And I'm not sure how to explain that. This closing parenthesis closes up this opening parenthesis that basically is the meat of the whole event listener. And then you've got your ending statement, semicolon, that closes up this whole statement. This whole thing is a whole one statement. Now after that we have function play segment. This is a function with a name, play segment, and these are the parameters I was telling you about. This is a recipe. A function is a recipe. It is the directions and how the light works, but it's not the light switch. You have to call play segment to turn it on. This is just inventing it. And start time is the first parameter, and there's that comma. End time is the second parameter, and in the meat of the curly braces is basically the recipe, the instructions. The first instruction is that segment end equals end time. Whatever we put as the second argument to this variable, that value is going to go into this variable called segment end. And then the second statement is odd.currentTime equals start time. So start time, whatever is the first argument for this parameter when we call play segment, is going to be assigned to this odd.currentTime. And then odd.play is going to play that little snippet of the MP3 file by being given the start time and the end time. And I know that may seem exceptionally confusing if you don't code at all, but it's really not that bad once you just get something running, and then you just keep replicating. You take a little program that you make and you replicate it with a couple slight changes, and then you add a little more and you learn a little something different, and it gets easier and easier to understand with time. So anyway, this little function and these little statements in my script tag is my JavaScript, and there's the ending HTML tag. This gave me the ability, this and this little piece right here inside the script tag gave me the ability to section my MP3 file and play it based on a user's click event. So I've showed you a lot of things that may be confusing, because normally when I do tutorials I start at the top of a file and it's boring, but I read from the top to the bottom, and then I let you see how all the different files are linked, how the external CSS and the external JavaScript link to the landing page of the HTML. But or really not just the landing page, any HTML web page. But this time I just wanted to show you again how this particular thing, if the way I had my CSS positioning this background, I wasn't able to see my flowers, and so I wanted to see my flowers too. I wanted to see the leaves and the flowers, not just the leaves or the flowers. As you scroll, I wanted to see the whole thing, and so we figured out how to do that. There's always a question that you come up with when you are coding. If you're imaginative and creative and you're like, oh, I want to do that, I wonder how you do that, you're always going to be able to find out how to do that. There's so much information. You may not find the best way to do it, because a lot of times this freebie information that you get might be dated information, it might not be the most efficient, but it will get you into learning, and then you get lucky and you find more concise code. What else did I think I needed to show you? What did I need? Well, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. If you decide to take code and chop it up like this so that you can click, you don't have to click on a H1 tag. That's just one particular element. You can click on an image, you can click on a div, you can click on a nav. These are list items. Whatever you stick in your page. Right here, I got a little image. I click on this. When I go down here to my footer of whatever external page is being pulled into this iframe, this little image here, I've turned into something that you click and you get a little MP4 thing that plays, which it's frozen right now, so I'll just get away from it. But you can have on click events for anything, or mouse over events, mouse out events. There's tons and tons of events that you can make a function belong to. But let's see, if you go the route that I did, it's easier to do it this way and just have one long MP3, and each individual thing that you click on just turns that one thing on. But if you, for whatever reason, would like to break something up into little bite-sized pieces like I just did off of one single MP3, that's the way to go. And because they're slightly different between browsers, this is my tip. And this is what I'm going to do if I do try to do this on Chapter 8. Chunk it up like that. When I read, while I'm reading, and this is what I use for creating my audio files, I use, if it'll pop up here, Audacity. If I'm going to read from one subtopic to the next, I'm going to read it, blah, 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 blah. And then when I get to the very last part, I'm going to pause for 2 seconds. Okay, I'm going to have a nice gap between my first header, or my first little piece of the topic, till where I want to stop, wherever I want, wherever. Now that I know I have the code to do this, I'm going to make sure that I don't just rattle on with very little dead space in between, because there's that slight 1 to 2 and possibly 2.5 second variation between Firefox and Chrome, because there's no wiggle room. If you just talk, then it's hard to find the beginning and ending that doesn't like completely not match well. So by giving yourself a nice dead space, you're buying yourself some padding room so that you do have a little more flexibility with the timings between the browsers. So that's the way I'll get around that until I find a better way to code that. That'll be my workaround. So that's just a tip that I thought I'd tell you if you do want to take a big long MP3 file. Wherever it is you think you want to stop, just give yourself some dead space, and then hit your pause button, and now we're on to the second blah de blah do in chapter 2, or whatever this is you're talking about. Or maybe this is a song or some baloney, or maybe this is a direction, and now you think you want to stop. Give yourself some dead space. And another thing we can probably do, which I haven't done it, but this is a timeline. If you're going to leave yourself a dead space and then you have your timeline here, you could probably just open up your notepad and identify the different dead spaces. This looks like 25.5. So you might put 25.5 there. And where was the first one? Can I go back? And this is like 8.5, 8.75. You might do your thing like that, and it might save you some headache. Because when I was doing this and I was trying to make it work for both Firefox, Opera, and Chrome, and it would start talking at one spot and stop talking at another for one browser, and it wouldn't do the same thing for another. It was really, really very annoying. So I think that this little tip of dead space will be the trick until I find, like I said, until I find a better way to do this. Alright, that's about it. Not, I know this is a very strange video because it's choppy. I don't normally like to do coding videos with just little sections like this, but I did want to do this one.